Hi, this is Tom Walsh of Fallen Oak Drums. Welcome to the last in my series of restoring an old Sears drum set. Don't adjust your mobile phone. I'm going to narrate over most of this live audio. It didn't come out very well. I have a lot of clips to share with you today. Through the previous videos, we saw an introduction to the project, disassembly of the drums, a major repair for one of the drums which was out of round, but now we're getting to see the rest of the process. The drums, being very old and cheaply made, had some separations in the plywood laminates, especially along the bearing edge. So what I do in this next clip is use some CA glue and some of the activator spray that you can buy for CA glue to fill in those gaps. It was a pretty good process, and the only difficulty I had was actually aiming that spray to where I put the glue. It's trickier than it looks. So CA glue is the same thing as crazy glue, super glue, and as everyone knows, it dries pretty fast. If you're not careful, you can glue your fingers together or glue yourself to something that you don't want to. But this activator dries it even faster and it hardens it. And so it's really awesome when you want a quick repair, as long as the area that you're repairing isn't too huge. At this point, I've sanded the bass drum on the inside, and I kind of jumped the gun there because I'd failed to really notice or acknowledge that there's some big gaps inside the shell of the bass drum that needed to be filled. There was separation in the laminates, and there was some tear out by some of the holes, and so really I wanted to fix those before I sanded the inside of the drum. So I just kind of jumped the gun, and that's kind of what I do. So for that part, I used epoxy. It's cheaper and fills a little bit deeper, better, I guess, than the CA glue. I also found some splits in some of the other drums, the floor tom there, and the 12-inch tom had some terrible tear out. So epoxy is great stuff, but it's usually advertised as like 5-minute epoxy. It's 5 minutes until it sort of sets. It still feels tacky, and you can't really sand it for several hours. I usually let it go overnight, and that's what I did in this case too. With the inside of the drum shells all squared away, epoxied up, and sanded down, I turned my attention to the blue sparkle wraps on the drums, which didn't have that much to do. There were a few areas where the wrap had separated right at the seam, and I went back to using CA glue with the activator to seal those up. I didn't really capture as much of this as I would have liked to. I'm only showing you the top part of the repair. And there were actually 2 seams on the bass drum that needed to be repaired. But they both came out really well. I think the repair should last for a long time, as long as the drums are treated nicely from here on. Next step shown here is the routing of the bearing edges. For the outside of all my shells, I'm using an 1/8 inch roundover bit, and for the inside, I use a 45-degree chamfer bit or bevel bit if you prefer. The idea there is to get a real even edge all the way around the circumference of each shell so that the drum head can tune nicely and have a real sort of even tuning surface to bear upon. So I show you a whole bunch of routing here. Enjoy. The routing went pretty well. A few small spots needed some extra TLC, some sanding because of a little bit of tear out. But when that was done, I got to finally turn my attention to cleaning these things up. And I have kind of a 3-part system, I guess. First thing I do is use some glass cleaner just to get the massive amount of dust off of the drum shells and any accumulated dirt, I hope. And then I move on to using Goo Gone. A bottle that I show you is probably about 30 years old. Stuff gonna last forever. And that works really great for getting rid of the adhesives, such as that left behind by the Goodwill sticker that they put on every one of these drums. It also took care of some wax crayon that I think they use at Goodwill to do their preliminary pricing mark on the item. And I just go around the whole drum to look for any other possible gunk that might require Goo Gone. My next step is to apply some wax, and for this I'm just using some Meguiar's Quick Wax, a product I picked up in the spring when I wanted to do a quick shine up on my car, and it seemed to work pretty well on that, so I figured why not on some 50-year-old blue sparkle drums. It did work pretty well, so I just apply that to the whole thing. You leave it sit for a few seconds, and then you wipe it off. It's really easy. All right, let's see what kind of dazzling finish we can get with the buffing wheel. So yeah, I'm wearing both a face mask for breathing and a face shield that I use for all my woodworking because this thing is just throwing up all kinds of threads and fibers and stuff from that cloth wheel, and I don't know what it's made of, so I figure why not. But it did a really nice job. I mean, and I think you can see already that that shine is really looking beautiful. The wrap held up really well over the years. So that was one drum shell essentially done, all cleaned and repaired and polished in that order. And so here I march it out of the garage and take it upstairs to my, call it my drum room. Don't tell my wife, but it's my drum room number 2. Anyway, I bring it up to that drum room because I want to, keep it clean until I'm ready to assemble it. And there's actually a lot more to do before I get to the point of assembling it. Right, so we're going to leave it there until we get the other drums all polished up, and then we got to work on the hardware, get that all polished up, and we'll do the assembly up here where it's nice and non-dusty. Yeah, so there's a lot of drums back there, and I admit I have a problem, but it's a problem I like to have. Back in the garage, I move on to cleaning up the bass drum hoops. These are chrome hoops that have a blue sparkle inlay, I guess you could say, on the outside of the hoop. There's a little bit of repair I had to do there just in terms of gluing down the loose wrap. One of the bass drum hoops came up short in terms of that blue wrap, so that part that is missing the wrap is just going to end up on the bottom of the hoop that faces the drummer, so no one will ever know. I thought that was a pretty clever workaround for probably never being able to match that blue wrap with a replacement that I could buy anywhere. I've long known that you could use aluminum foil and some solution to clean the rust off of chrome, and that was demonstrated to me as a kid with some old bicycle handlebars. More recently, I've been watching other YouTube videos where WD-40 and aluminum foil kind of does the same thing. And since I have it, and since I always have plenty of aluminum foil around, I decided to try it, and it worked pretty well. So first I cleaned up the Tomtom mounts. Tomtom mounts are part of the bass drum, and the toms will hang on those. And there's several pieces, has to be disassembled and to get it really clean, which I did. And then I moved on to the bass drum lugs, where there's also a little bit of disassembly. Each one of them has a spring and a swivel nut inside. So I'll give you a little bit of close up on that. This hardware was not in bad shape, just dirty, a little bit of oxidation, very little rust though, so I really lucked out on that. Here's all of the bass drum hardware. I have cleaned it all with WD-40 and aluminum foil, and then I took it over to the buffing wheel, every single one of those pieces, and ran this baby. You get the idea. And so now I'm ready to start reassembling the bass drum. So now I start assembling the bass drum, starting with the bass drum spurs and then the tom mounts. And when that's all said and done, I have to work on the bass drum lugs. So I'll show you that coming up. I apologize for the lack of close-up detail here. I could have done way better, but filming in a new environment, I guess I kind of lost my edge. All right, what we got here is some generic cotton. And really don't need a whole ball for each lug. So just pull off a chunk. And stick it into the back of the lug. And wedge it like so. It no longer resonates in any way. You just get it's not going to make any noise. I've been doing that cotton ball trick on all of my lugs recently that come with those springs. Saw it on a video on YouTube, of course, and I think it's probably more important for recording applications. You want to cut down on any extraneous noise that you can when you're in the studio. Probably how I use it though, how I use my drum set is I would never even notice the difference, but I still like to do it. Now we're going to do some fast motion installation of the bass drum lugs. There are 8 lugs per side of the drum for a total of 16 lugs. They each have 2 screws, and I turn those in by hand, and then for some reason I decided to go with the impact driver to tighten them up, which afterwards I thought that was silly because I could have stripped out the head of a screw or stripped out the threaded part of the lug, which would have been kind of a disaster. So, I don't know. Live and learn. I wouldn't do it again, and I didn't do it on any of the rest of the drums. As the assembly continues, I install the tuning rods and actually tune up each head. These heads I bought from a used music instruments store called Evolution Music, and it was kind of nice. It only cost me about 11 bucks per head. If you buy new bass drum heads this size, they're anywhere from 30 to 50 bucks each normally. So I wanted to keep it reasonable. In honor of this being a Goodwill acquired drum set, and it probably originally came with a really cheap bass drum pedal, I'm using the cheapest pedal that I have as a test. As happy as I was to be done with one drum, there's still a lot of work to do. So I broke out all the hardware that I had bagged from the 3 Tomtoms, laid them out on my workbench, and got to work. Same deal with the WD-40 and aluminum foil on these. And just for the sake of documentation, I filmed assembling the floor tom once again inside, away from the dust and the dirt. And this was the last of the drums to be assembled. Borrow a set of floor tom legs from another drum that currently wasn't using, seems to be whenever I find a floor tom at a resale store, it's missing the legs, which is unfortunate because I've got several extra floor toms now with no legs. But fortunately I had a set that fit, and actually the same is true for the bass drum spurs. I picked up a really old bass drum after the Blue Sparkle drum set, and the spurs fit perfectly. So I still have to acquire another set so I can finish that other drum out someday, but for now I'm good. And so there they are, the 4 drums. No snare drum, unfortunately. I guess you'll probably want to hear them. So after doing that, I couldn't help but do this. Well, I hope that wasn't too gratuitous. It's only the second time I've ever played a double bass drum set, and with the 2 drum sets in the room, I just couldn't resist. So here's how I was looking. The project's all done. I've got these set up with my maple drums. I made these myself a couple years ago when I first started building stave drums. It's really a lot of fun having 5 toms to play, double kick. Although I need some work on setting up the hi-hat closer to the other pedal, and I do have another stand that's made for doing that. I've got mostly Zildjian cymbals up here, a little pasty splash that I like, and I got this really old Kingston ride cymbal that it's kind of dead sounding but kind of cool. And Zildjian ping ride over here, 18-inch crash, 17-inch crash, 16-inch crash. These are some vintage Zildjian hi-hats, which I'm very fond of. I've had them since 1978, I think, and they're pretty awesome. My thoughts on the Blue Sparkle drums is I'm going to keep them for a while. I really love having them. They're just so pretty, even though they're cheaper drums. And so I think I want to conclude the video now, and while I put up this original catalog picture of what these drums look like, at least it's my firmest belief that the drums I just restored are indeed from the Sears catalog. I just should give you the bare facts on these. One is that I paid about $34 for these drums at Goodwill. I had some percentage off that day. I think it would have been 40 if I hadn't. And I spent another $25 or so on the bass drum heads that I mentioned. I had other drum heads around that I used, so I don't know what to factor in for the cost of those, but all in all, a pretty cheap but extremely satisfying project. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that you will subscribe to my channel in case I put out any future videos. They're typically going to be woodworking and or drumming related. So just thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Take care now. Ho, ho, ho. And what would you like for Christmas, Tommy?
I want some drums. That's all I want. Just give me some drums, please.
I'm sorry, but you've been a bad boy. Ho, ho, ho.